Thank you very much. My dear friend, President Santoki, Minister Ramdin, other distinguished members of Cabinet, members of the diplomatic community, and my dear friends in Suriname, good night. Thank you very much. It is a profound honor to stand here tonight with you, not merely as the head of government or as the chair of CARICOM, but truly as a daughter of the Caribbean region, deeply in love with its beauty, its people, and of course, its enduring spirit. But at the outset, let me assure you that unlike the British Governor Lord Willoughby in 1650, and you know, who traveled from Barbados to Suriname with intentions of land grab and land settlement, I have not come with those intentions or ambitions. Indeed, if I may, I really come truly in a spirit of love and family. And I mean that not just as a general statement, but literally. My mother is born in Aruba, and you know what is the first language of Aruba. And similarly, her older brothers and sisters remained there when she came to Barbados with her parents at the age of 10. So it means that my first cousins, many of them, their first language is Dutch. And equally, one of my uncles, as a result, is Surinamese. And he is an Ektel. So you well know that I therefore come truly in the spirit of love and family and not that of land acquisition and claim. But the Caribbean, therefore, is not just where we live. It is who we are. Amen. Truly. It is the music that moves us. It is the stories that we tell. It is the resilience that binds us. From the infectious rhythms of reggae and soca, to your own here, to the vibrant colors of carnival, from the artistry of road tennis, to the legacy of cricket for many of us, to those who have embraced football now, we are a region truly of boundless creativity. And our culture is our heart, our history, and our hope. And the passion that we display allows us to have a flair and indeed a taste. It's not bland in any stretch of the imagination. But yet, as we celebrate this richness, we are tasked with the urgent challenge of how we translate the beauty and the power of our culture into a force that drives sustainable development and economic growth for our nations. And not just that, because today I come not only to speak about the economic opportunities or culture as that driving tool, but truly culture as the platform from which we determine how we care, how we become risk takers, how we ensure that we are disciplined, how we take responsibility for our lives, and indeed how we drive it through innovation and sustainability. As one of the world's most culturally rich regions, Caribbean has a natural edge, and we know it. But that natural edge isn't enough. To seize this moment, we must reimagine our culture, not only in terms of heritage or tourism, as a pillar for either of them, but as a driver, not just equally, of creative and entertainment sectors, but as a driver of that empathy of which I just spoke, of responsibility, of discipline, of risk-taking, of innovation. Because if we cannot balance all of these things, we will be shortchanging ourselves and our people, especially in today's world. Fundamentally, we see the transformative force of culture as having four key roles, therefore, in the transformation of the Caribbean region. One, Culture as a catalytic driver of economies, well, we know that naturally. 2, culture as a driver of sustainable development. 3, building the values of our people to strengthen individuals and families, to enhance productivity, to resolve conflicts, and everything that goes in between. And finally, strengthening our democracy and our community resilience as a result of shared heritage and culture and shared facts. So let me address the first aspect of it. And fundamentally, this relates to the issue of culture as a driver of economic transformation. You know better than most in this country that diversity sells. People want flavor. People want the opportunity to be able to experience a range of cultures. And you have expressed it best from your food, to your music, to your language, to your dance, to your art. Suriname is in truth and in fact the iconic aspect of Caribbean civilization represented here. More than 10 languages and dialects spoken, a tapestry of ethnicity that is unmatched for most parts of the world. These are the things that lead to the creativity and the expression that cause people to want to learn more and to want to participate, and in many instances, want to purchase. With the rapid advance of digital technologies such as social media and AI, the global creative economy is undergoing an unprecedented revolution. Creative industries, whether it is music or film or art or literature or fashion or digital media, are among the fastest growing sectors in the world today. According to UNCTAD's Creative Economy Outlook 2024, the creative services now account for almost 20%. Yes, 20% of global service exports, generating over $1.4 trillion in 2022. Developing countries, including many in the global south, have therefore doubled their share of exports of services in the last decade. We know now about Afrobeats in a way that you would not have heard about it 20, 30 years ago unless you were an aficionado of African culture specifically. But it has now become mainstream in many aspects, in the same way that reggae and calypso have become mainstream. There are other marginal rhythms, including my own spooge in Barbados, which we hope one day will continue to rise again, because truthfully, our music expresses who we are, how we move, how we talk, what we feel. And apart from the lyrics, which represents a sociocultural history of who we are, the music is infectious enough to extend and to bring in and embrace the entire world. The numbers that I just referred to are staggering. But what they reveal even more is that creativity is becoming one of the most valuable commodities in today's world, in the modern economy. And the Caribbean, I assert, is unmatched when it comes to the wealth of talent and cultural capital. Indeed, we represent a microcosm of the world's civilizations, and therefore we are in the best position to express that creativity and to find willing audiences in different parts of the world, because we are a part of them all. From Africa to India to the Middle East to China to Europe, we have to Indonesia, to all over the world, we have elements of it here. And mercifully, in spite of the genocide that took place over the course of centuries, indigenous Indians remain also as part of this region. Let us examine the global influence of reggae. Born in Jamaica and now recognized by UNESCO as a cultural treasure. When it came to determining the top song for the 20th century, who did they choose? Bob Marley. And we have to recognize, therefore, that this expression of who we are has, fortunately, for those who practice in this ecosystem, has generated millions and hundreds of millions in revenue each and every year through concerts, through tourism, through merchandising, and of course through revenue gained from intellectual property. Similarly, in my own country, our crop over, or indeed the Carnival of Trinidad and Tobago, or the Junkanoo in Bahamas, or the carnivals everywhere from Suriname right back through the Eastern and Southern Caribbean. The origins of these carnivals are rooted in moments of release. That was necessary during the most tyrannical and exploitative parts of our history, and the carnival was used to allow people to just breathe and to give of themselves in a way that they could release in circumstances where for the rest of all of the year, they were forced literally to be objects of another person's orders. But this release, and you may argue that today it is still a form of release, even though there is not the tyrannical scenarios that existed at the time of its origins, but this release is not its only benefit today. These carnivals are also economic engines. They fuel tourism. They fuel, they fuel hospitality. They fuel fashion, and indeed countless other industries across the region. The economic activity goes into the tens of millions of dollars on an annual basis, and therefore we see now that there is a more structured approach to engaging and planning and promoting of these carnivals, and very often the artists move from country to country to country, being able to ensure that they can guarantee they and their families a living. And they're the ones up front. But look at the rest of the ecosystem, from sound engineers to film producers to set designers to all kinds, to those who have to put up the stages and the lighting. All of these people benefit now from an ecosystem that is essentially rooted in the creativity of a few. These are not isolated successes. They are benchmarks indeed of what is possible when we invest in and when we value our cultural assets. But they remind us that there's untapped potential that remains. Across this region, countless creators, innovators, and entrepreneurs are waiting for the opportunity to share their talents with the world. And they have opportunities now that they did not have 3 and 4 decades ago. To seize this moment, therefore, we must rethink how we approach culture, not as a static inheritance, but as a dynamic industry. This will mean creating even stronger frameworks that will empower those artists, those musicians, the filmmakers, and the writers to monetize their work. It means protecting their intellectual property and ensuring that we enforce against the breaches that may take place within our societies. It means ensuring that that wealth that is created flows back into the communities from which they've come. And it means investing in infrastructure, whether it is studios or sound stages or theaters or galleries or digital platforms. And more often than not, because the people who are investing and expressing themselves don't have the capital, that falls on us as governments to ensure that that infrastructure and that ecosystem is nurtured. Culture, my friends, is a productive sector, as valid as mining, as valid as tourism, as valid as agriculture. Imagine a Caribbean where every storyteller has the tools to reach a global audience, where every musician can produce and distribute their music independently without having to wait to be signed by some big label, and where every artist can showcase their work on digital platforms that can truly, truly celebrate Caribbean creativity. This is not a distant dream. It is a tangible goal. And it begins with recognizing that the creative economy as a cornerstone is a cornerstone of our development strategy. This year, we are planning now to host CariFesta 15 from the 22nd to the 31st of August in Barbados. You know it well because you have hosted CariFesta as well. This is the 3rd time that we will be hosting it as a nation in its just over 50-year history. And I want to use the opportunity to invite all of you to to come to Barbados for Carry Festa 15. Yes, you come too. I see you wearing blue and yellow. and to recognize that this is the ultimate celebration in the region, as you know, from food to fashion, from music to dance, from art and sculpture to craft, from drama to film, and of course, talk and more talk and more talk, from religion to politics to philosophy to development. That is the beauty of the Caribbean region. And with the flair of extemporizing, as we do always so well, whether in Kaiso or in dance hall, we expect you to be there, because it is the synergy of what we bring that truly, truly creates that flavorful creativity that causes the rest of the world to look on enviously. My friends, we are a microcosm of the global community and global civilization. But as I said, it isn't only the entertainment industry that really is within the purview of what we talk about when we speak about culture. Let's talk about culture as a catalyst for sustainable development, especially in today's world. Culture isn't therefore to be disregarded when we talk about building resilience. And it is ironic that this lecture here is titled the Self Reliance Trefossa Lecture. I'm told that that was an ad. Throughout history, our ancestors used their creativity to adapt to the challenges of their time. They created music, as we discussed just now, to uplift spirits during hardship. They developed farming techniques to sustain their families, very often on the most inhospitable of lands, because if land was fertile, who owned it? Plantation owners. And therefore, our people were left to exist on what we in Barbados call rabland, marginal lands that literally were very, very difficult from which to extract yield for crops. But we conquered that. We created various mechanisms equally for savings. In my own country, we had something called susu, or meet and turn. As we called it meet and turn, others called it susu. Simply by coming together and pooling funding in a way that others now have heralded the Grameen Bank, we have been doing it here for over a century and a half in communities without reference to the large institutions, so that families can move particularly together, ensuring that they could meet the challenges of the moment. We created various mechanisms equally to deal with scarcity of housing and food. In our own region, many people talk about the share pot mentality, that if you had today, you shared with me. And tomorrow when I had, I shared with you. That sense of solidarity allowed us to survive. Today, as we face the existential threat of the climate crisis, and please do me a favor, I don't know what is climate change. I know a climate crisis. And as we face the existential climate crisis, threat of the climate crisis, the wisdom of our cultural heritage has never been more resilient. In my own country, we are seeing the rising sea levels. I call this the season of superlatives and the season of the unexpected. You only have to look at what is happening in California to know that in the month where they expect the most rain has laid bare to the worst and most awful of fires that they have seen in their history. The reality is that the consequences of this type of activity for us is truly, truly threatening our way of life. I say all the time that when regions and sectors and countries become uninsurable, they become uninvestable. And in a very real sense, while we have been speaking about the risk of uninsurance for some time, it is unfolding yet again before our very eyes, coming out of the 2 hurricanes in Florida and indeed the wildfires in California where insurance companies have simply withdrawn coverage from clients with respect to the risk of hurricanes and floods in Florida and the southeastern USA, and to the risk of wildfires in California. So that when we speak about it and we say that we've been suffering it, people are now beginning to understand and appreciate that for the last few decades, much of the debt that was accumulated by countries in this region have literally been as a result of these events, extreme weather events, compounded by biodiversity loss. These are not abstract concepts. These are daily realities. In our own region, Hurricane Beryl devastated Union Island and Carriacou last year in the Grenadines, and indeed caused damage to St. Vincent and Grenada, and in the case of Barbados, decimated our fishing industry, where 90% of the boats were either destroyed or damaged, and where for the last 7 months, our fishermen have been struggling to rebuild, because rebuilding a boat does not happen with a twiggling of a nose as it did in Bewitched with Elizabeth. Some of you are old enough. But while we must demand action from the global community, we have to look inward, and we have to see how our own practices can help us to ensure that we are not the victims of the worst excesses of the climate crisis. In our own case as well, as one of the 15 most water-scarce countries of the world, we have been facing drought for the first 6 months of the year, and indeed excessive rain, and something new to us, convection rain, for the last 6 months of the year. Convection rain, as you would see in Miami and Jamaica, because of the extreme heat in the middle of the day. But that intense rain causes threats to us because our infrastructure was not built to be able to accommodate the intensity and pace and volume of what comes down within a short period. Similarly, the beginning of 2023, we had 50% of the rainfall for the last 30 years, showing clearly that drought will be an ever-present companion, regrettably, for our nations. In Barbados, we have therefore started to look and see how we can pioneer projects that blend cultural and environmental stewardship, such as integrating black-belly sheep farming with the development of solar energy farms. And in the ministry that deals with town planning, a policy decision was taken that wherever we put solar energy plants, that we have them high enough to ensure that there's agricultural farming accompanying it. The reality is that for most of it, it will be livestock, like black-belly sheep, but in instances where people are not interested in livestock, we encourage then vegetable production because of how land-hungry solar farming is, as you know. Similarly, we believe that we can, through this, address the multiple challenges, therefore, of enhancing food security, giving the opportunities for renewable energy to our people, and preserving traditional agricultural practices. We also see festivals adopt eco-friendly approaches in this region. The St. Kitts Music Festival, from reducing single-use plastics to promoting sustainable tourism, has been one of the key examples in the Caribbean region. That is where we have seen the implementation of green initiatives that have set a standard for cultural events in our region. These efforts demonstrate that sustainability and celebration, my friends, are not mutually exclusive, that they can and that they must go hand in hand. This, we hope, to see replicated in other festivals across the region, and of course in CariFesta 15. So my friends, we must have the cultural confidence to bet on ourselves and our capabilities. Our adverse approach to strategic risk-taking has inhibited, for example, our development trajectory. It makes no sense that we have billions of dollars in excess liquidity in the Caribbean region, earning next kin to nothing, Many countries. You are a little more here in Suriname, I'm told, but in the rest of the region, it ranges from 0.01% to no more than 2.5% in the majority of the region. And yet, there are multiple projects that are begging for financing in order for us to build prosperity and to build resilience in this region. But more often than not, even when the projects are made public, the adverse approach that we have to taking risks causes many of our citizens to sit back and let those opportunities go by, even though there is a win-win approach for them and the person undertaking the project and ultimately the country. Equally, in the area of health and wellness, we also see a large footprint with the habits of our forebears, our great-grandparents and our great-great-grandparents, who used traditional medicine to treat many of the illnesses that they had. We now hear about this herb and this plant, but more often than not, you got it through some kind of concoction called bush tea. And we now know that the world is recognizing the importance of these remedies through all kinds of branded bottles now that are sold in pharmacies and stores across the world. But traditionally, where did they come from? Our backyard, our pastures, our gullies, our oceans. So my friends, there is a recognition that there is tremendous value to indigenous knowledge, and very often pharmaceutical companies have just simply taken what people have been using for centuries and put it in a different format and have sold it to us for value added far, far in excess of what we would have had to pay here. Equally, the knowledge of indigenous people in addressing environmental challenges is now even more relevant as we look at California. Native American traditions of controlled burns were not just people who just felt like doing something because they wanted to burn an area. They understood that if they had controlled burns, that it could be a solution to preventing an even more devastating fire. And that's why many of the laws today, not in force, would have required that you cut down the brush so that when high winds come, there is nothing for the fire to take root and to continue to spread beyond the normal boundaries that it would. So our own ancestral practices, my friends, from organic farming to rainwater harvesting to community-based resource management to bush medicine, all of these offer insights to us with respect to how we can treat to the issue of sustainable development. We are in a race against time over the next decade. Whether we like it or not, and we're not going to get into the reasons of why and how or whatever, but it is a fact that this world has hit 1.5 degrees too many times over the course of the last 2 years. Our only hope is how we can bring it down. And the only hope for that is us being able to treat to the issue of methane. And I keep making the point in almost every speech. Methane is 80 times more devastating to the environment than carbon. Carbon, however, lasts for hundreds of years. Methane lasts for 12 years. If we can find ways of reducing methane, we can then, at the same time, ensure that there is a win-win for everyone. And let me be very clear. You can do that by not allowing gas to be flared or not allowing gas leaks to happen. In both instances, money is made by not flaring gas, and money is made by fixing gas leaks. But at the same time, the planet benefits by not having the extraordinary pressure on it. How we farm in rice paddies, how we farm with livestock, we have to find new ways to do it, equally to be able to reduce the volume of methane that is coming. And the issue is not simply fossil fuels. The issue is the emissions. And if we can treat to the issue of emissions by finding decarbonizing technology at commercial scale, then countries like Suriname and Guyana and Ghana can begin to have an opportunity to be able to finance their way to net zero by being able to exploit the resources that they have rather than simply being shut down from day one. The challenge, therefore, is how do we integrate this wisdom into modern policy and practice? It requires collaboration between governments, cultural organizations, private sector, individuals. It requires us to prioritize education, ensuring that future generations understand and value the cultural heritage that can guide them towards sustainable development. This topic is not going away, and our duty in this century is to guide our people to building the modern resilience that's necessary in the same way that those who went long before us developed the capacity for building resilience to go through very difficult and arduous times that were beyond their control to change at that point in time. The third aspect is how do we use Caribbean culture and values to foster peace, to build productivity, to strengthen families, to build individuals who are far more sensitive to the realities. At the heart of Caribbean culture lies the importance of the extended family and, by extension, a deep sense of community. And I want to quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, and I quote, "Children learn about the nature of the world from their family. They learn about power and about justice, about peace and about compassion. They learn this within the family. Whether we oppress or liberate our children in our relationships with them will determine whether they grow up to oppress and be oppressed or to liberate and be liberated." The family is the most important unit that we have. The strength that we have inherited is continually challenged. This commitment we have to the extended family is continually challenged by the emphasis on individualism that modern Western societies embrace. We have come more and more to understand that this runs counter to the very spirit of community that we must nurture in our people. Indeed, our success in fostering resilience that allowed us to endure slavery and colonialism, where did it come from? It came from our cooperation and solidarity with each other, by working with each other. And therefore, when I speak often about the concept of Ubuntu, which is celebrated in Southern Africa, we see elements of it in the principles that we speak to in the Caribbean region that are readily found among us. And what is that? That sense of I am because we are. I am because other people are. I only exist because others exist. We see it in Christianity, and we see it in simple rules that we teach our children, the golden rule, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. This must be a lived reality. Discipline and balance must accompany it. But the truth is that if we don't see our humanity in others, and if we don't act together to build, we are not going to be able to maintain strong societies. And I've said enough just now to show you that the pathway to resilience in our history was through collective action in sharing of housing and food and pooling savings and doing all of those things that allowed our grandparents and great-grandparents to be successful in creating the platform for us today. As I said, discipline and balance are equally critical to ensuring that we don't see persons suffering from behavioral choices that may mean loss of life. Sometimes, the way in which some of our people treat to their bodies or treat to how they move on roads and road accidents, or to drug addiction and substance abuse, or to all other kind of harmful practices, not recognizing that food is medicine. These things all lead to either a loss of life at worst, a loss of personal liberty, a loss of limb, or a loss of livelihood. And we have consciously to cause people to accept responsibility for their actions and to understand that life is fundamentally about choices. And our culture must reinforce that from the young people that we have, so that when they become teenagers and want to embrace risk, want to do risky things, that they can do so in a responsible way that does not cause harm to themselves, their families, or by extension the country. Throughout history, we have relied on one another to overcome adversity. As I said, we had those communal savings that made all the difference. The meeting turned the susu. And our ancestors understood that that solidarity and that collaboration was key and absolutely key to our survival. My friends, we have, at this point, to recognize that these values are not relics of the past. They are principles that can transform our societies today. Imagine workplaces that can embrace the spirit of collective labor. Imagine it, where individuals work together towards shared goals, supporting one another's efforts, where we take the time to explain to workers why what they're doing is important and where they fit in the mix. As the same Archbishop Tutu said and reminded us, a man playing a triangle in an orchestra just does ting every few seconds. But the absence of that ting may make a huge difference to the quality of the symphony's performance. We have to appreciate that all of us matter. All. Imagine a Caribbean, therefore, where productivity is driven not by competition, but by collaboration. Imagine a Caribbean where we start looking at changing how we learn in schools, not just to have a hierarchical, vertical and column type and row type approach to setting out a classroom, but looking at project-based learning so that we learn to work as teams and we learn from early that individualism that the consumerist culture is trying to push on us cannot carry us ultimately to achieving our goals. This is an important recognition if we want to avoid the very rigid and hierarchical system of class that we inherited with feudal roots. This will not carry us anywhere. Equally, we must reject the fast and instantaneous approach to everything. Everything today is instant. Fast food, fast this, fast that. More often than not, progress requires what? Consistency of effort. Consistency of effort. Staying focused. Being persistent. But that is often not witnessed across this region sufficiently. Too often what we get are sporadic efforts. And the sporadic efforts may sometimes lead to glory, sometimes lead to despair. But we forget the good old adage, one swallow does not a summer make. And that what is required from us more than anything else, and I speak from the heart on this one, is consistency of effort. We are too easily distracted, and we are too easily allowing ourselves, therefore, to be displaced on our journey of development. The Eastern civilizations know it better. The notion that we can achieve everything in one life cycle is unrealistic for most major efforts in life. We are but part of a relay system, and the quicker we understand that and we respect it, will be the basis for and the foundation for our building greatness, even further greatness and resilient greatness for the Caribbean civilization. But my friends, as we strive for progress, we have to confront also our challenges that threaten our communities. And I'm not going to hide from it, because as recent as the end of November, heads of government met in Georgetown, just after we met with Prime Minister Modi, to meet for the 2nd regional symposium hosted by Barbados in Georgetown. leading to the Bridge Declaration, Georgetown and Bridgetown, that speaks to the manner in which we will confront this issue of violence in our region. Violence threatening our communities, fueled by the proliferation, regrettably, of illegal firearms. This is tearing apart the fabric of our society. I have had cause to say in my own country that we pay a very high price for the Second Amendment rights of the Americans. Guns leave no room for dialogue, no opportunity for reconciliation. And we must remember that the core of our ability to solve conflict is our capacity genuinely to express how we feel and how we believe conflicts can be resolved. I learned this early as a young minister of education. Because if a person does not know how to tell you how he or she feels when you offend them, when you hurt them, when you do something to them, they are likely to resort to physical violence. And therefore, it is interesting that I make this point at this lecture, given the legacy of the person to whom we pay honor today. Language is critical in being able to unlock feelings and to communicate such that we can avoid the physical conflict and the physical damage, injuries that flow when we can't do it. And illiteracy and poor communication skills, therefore, are likely to lead to greater levels of violence, regrettably. We have to ensure that we confront these issues frontally, because violence is exacerbated by a dangerous cultural shift that we also have. And that is this modern obsession that our youngsters have been taught of taking things out of context when we talk about not taking disrespect. Context matters. And it is not every disrespect, every act of disrespect that must lead to some kind of retaliation or some kind of violence. Across the region, we see how the unwillingness to back down perpetuates cycles of retaliation. But our ancestors knew that true strength lies not in escalation, but in restraint. And we have now to teach our young people that particular lesson, and that they cannot take literally that every act of disrespect must now be matched by an act of violence. We will not survive that kind of cultural practice, and we must do everything in our power to remove it. Similarly, we have to invest in education and mentorship programs. We are so busy getting on with the rest of our lives that the things that used to allow older people to work with younger people decades ago no longer exist. Children are not only raised by their parents, they're raised by communities, they're raised by clubs, they're raised by organizations, they're raised by churches. And if we're not finding the time to invest so that we interact across generations, that we pass on wisdom, and very often books or Bible lessons can't tell you how and every instance in which things will happen. And it is the human interpretation that makes the difference to what does really mean, do unto others as you would say, do unto them. When they start to show and they say, look, you want to share that chocolate? Well, why you don't want to share the chocolate? Why you want somebody else's own? The very basic things in life. And it is our ability to show them by example that will make the ultimate difference, and not by instruction or literally by dictating to them, this is what will happen. And let me say, please, that guns don't walk and guns don't talk. They don't. So that if we can solve how we resolve conflict, then we don't have the gun problem. Yes, we must do all that we can to protect our borders and to have law enforcement go after them, all of that. But fundamentally, guns don't walk and guns don't talk. so that it is ultimately the efforts that we must put in raising and nurturing our children and teaching them how to resolve conflict. And for those who are no longer children, but are adults, we must work with them to show them a better way, because the society within which they live will soon become very inhospitable for all. Let me also deal, my friends, with this issue of underpopulation. Ironically, it was here in Suriname at the last Heads of Government that this was raised with my colleague heads. With the exception of Haiti, this entire region is underpopulated. You cannot drive growth and development with an underpopulated region. Indeed, only yesterday or day before, the IMF put out a document showing fully that the majority of the countries of the world will face aging and declining populations. In my own country, we understood this, and we established a National Population Commission because ECLAC predicted that by 2050, 1 in every 2 Barbadians will be over the age of 65. In the case of Jamaica and Trinidad, it will be 37 and 39% respectively. We in this region are facing all of the problems of the developed world with declining and aging populations. But I give this as context, because what I really want to address is the importance of developing a humanizing culture that is necessary for migrants and migration. We are a region of migrants. And if ever there was a region to lead the world in helping to settle how we deal with this most vexatious of issues, it is the Caribbean region that must lead the world on it. We stand here as children of migrants. And you heard me say earlier that the percentage of those who survived the genocide literally perpetrated against indigenous Indians in the region is minuscule. So that in almost every instance, whether it is 2 generations, 4 generations, 6 generations, or in the case of the Goodins in 1650 from Barbados, 8 or 10 generations of persons, we're all migrants. And we therefore have a responsibility to foster a humanizing culture and to ask the rest of the world to follow us in it. If you go to most meetings, you will hear more often than not, it is the Caribbean who stands up for social justice. It is the Caribbean who asks for a humanizing approach. It is the Caribbean who says we must see people, we must hear people, and we must feel people. And that now must be our hallmark. If we fall down on this, it is because we have accepted the xenophobic habits of others. And it is up to us to educate our people and to talk with our people in a mature way to recognize that xenophobia will not help anyone. And at this point in time, we have a duty to lead the world with respect to this. The world knows how to move money. It needs to know how to move people. The final aspect is how do we use culture to strengthen community resilience and democracy through shared values, shared heritage, and of course, shared facts. The common history that we share has evolved into a similar respect for institutions right across the region. We have the same developmental aspirations. We have many of the same institutions that protect our democracy. Indeed, the experience of us all has been that we can work together to make a difference in building these institutions. This slavery, it did us bad, very bad. And that oppression brought in us a healthy respect, as I just said, for social justice and solidarity. We know for certain that there can be no peace in this world, in any community, if there is no justice. Peace requires justice as a foundation. My friends, we know firsthand as well that people must be counted and seen and felt and heard, and not just treated as some group over there and referred to in generic terms as if they do not matter. That there must be respect for the individual dignity of each human being, and by extension, respect for our diversity. We're not created to be just like each other, because life would be boring, and we would never be able to appreciate why we need each other. So there are differences. But what must be the same is our values. What must be the same is our respect for those values and how we must work cooperatively with each other. And the truth is, our democracy is enhanced by those shared values. Equally, let us be blunt, it is threatened, seriously so, more and more, by the absence of shared facts, by their presence and prevalence of fake news. It should be noted that in today's world, social media has created a multiplicity of echo chambers. The former Chief Rabbi of London, Jonathan Sacks, used to refer to what is happening now as narrowcasting, not broadcasting. Narrowcasting. The days of having a common platform to watch news through television, or to listen to it through the radio, or to read it in newspapers, those days are almost gone. And when you look at it, there is virtually no single place, whether in the US or in Europe or in the Caribbean or in Africa, Latin America, where news is taken unless you're living in countries that have a central command of information. That is a fact. Reality is that it is mainly in schools now that we will find the opportunity to bring people of different backgrounds and different views together. Because when you look at it, these young people are watching this on YouTube or this on TikTok, and this other demographic is watching television news, and this other demographic is reading newspapers, and this other demographic is doing nothing. So that we have to recognize that that common platform will cease to create the shared values that we need in our country if we are to go forward. So schools is where it's going to be at. And we therefore have to invest heavier in what we instill in our children in those schools so that we can have people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different ages come in to understand what is the shared value and shared perspective necessary to strengthen our nation, to strengthen not just the national identity, but also Caribbean civilization. It is in this environment, regrettably, that we are more likely to see the rise of bigotry and racism. It is in this environment that we're more likely to see the undermining of institutions and the growing incidence of conflict and violence. We all know, too, that social media is having a deleterious impact on our societies, particularly our young people. Australia has taken a decision to ban TikTok. I am not sure that our societies can easily go down that road because the horse has long bolted from the stables. We have reports of Instagram wars or individuals not loving themselves because when they do this and do this and do this every day, they're comparing themselves to some idyllic AI-generated picture that is not real nor human, cannot align with what they see. And I can do no better than to quote His Holiness, Pope Francis, because in his writings Fratelli Tutti, he says it better than I could ever say it. Digital media can also expose people to the risk of addiction, isolation, and a gradual loss of contact with concrete reality, blocking the development of authentic interpersonal relationships. They lack the physical gestures, facial expressions, moments of silence, body language, and even the smells, the trembling of hands, the blushes and the perspiration that speak to us and are part of human communication. Digital communication lacks all of this. Digital relationships, which do not demand the slow and gradual cultivation of friendships, stable interaction, or the building of a consensus that matures over time, have the appearance of sociability. Yet they do not really build community. Instead, they tend to disguise and expand the very individualism that finds expression in xenophobia and in contempt for the vulnerable. Digital connectivity is not enough to build bridges. It is not capable of uniting humanity. There is value in the digital experience. There is enhanced productivity and even some elements of building resilience with a digital world. But it cannot replace human interaction and must never replace human interaction. If we do not work assiduously to counter these disruptive influences, my friends, we will pay the price. We have far less of a buffer than most countries because of our smallness of our populations in particular. Accordingly, our development policies as a nation across all aspects of social and economic and political endeavors must seek to create and forge as a deliberate act, our national identity anchored by the commonality of Caribbean civilization. This is why our citizenship must be reinforced across the entire population, not just with those coming through the schools. Citizenship is something that has to be taught. And we've developed a citizenship module that we have spread to tens of thousands, but I'm not even satisfied that it has gotten where we need to get it in Barbados. Our people must know that beyond their rights and their entitlements, which we all call for very easily because of our history, that we also have a duty to protect and to further build our communities, our nations, and our region. Responsibility has to be at the center of citizenship in this Caribbean region. That it is not just about rights, but it is about responsibility to self, to others, to community, and indeed to your country. I like to say all the time, and the others will laugh, that a house that is not maintained will become dilapidated. If you don't take care of the pipes and you don't take care of painting the wood, what happens to it after a while? It starts to become dilapidated. Same thing with our body. Muscles that are not used, what happens to it? They start to atrophy. Similarly, the values that are necessary to be instilled and the institutions that must be undergirded with our deliberate action and responsibility to protect freedom of expression, to protect freedom of association, to protect freedom of mobility, to protect all the other freedoms. All of these things are critical. And when we add to the fact that that absence is compounded now by fake news, we got problems. We got real problems. Fake news has to be called out. And we're going to have to develop institutions, especially now that Meta has made the recent announcement to remove its fact verification systems. We are going to have to find mechanisms in each country and across this region to let our citizens know what is real and what is not, particularly with AI-generated information predominating in social media. This is not idle chat. We only have to think back about what happened in Rwanda when hate speech was allowed to predominate on radio. And only recently, we saw others refer to Myanmar and others where issues of authenticity are believed, or lack of authenticity, are believed to be at the center of the disruption in those countries. In Rwanda, 1 million people lost their lives in a very short period of time. So we have a duty to protect our democracies, and we must do so by guarding jealously the need for information that is circulated to be rooted in facts. It's not simply the duty of government, my friends. It is not simply the duty of government. While government must find a mechanism, this duty must be supported by each individual, each family, each institution, each community. And we must say so and do it daily. if we are to be faithful to consistency. We have to make one another aware of this responsibility, and we have to hold each other accountable for acting in a manner that preserves the integrity of what we say and what we publish. Let us be very clear too. There is something called sins of omission, not just sins of commission. We are as guilty as those who perpetrate inaccuracies when we become indifferent to what is being said and what is being done in our presence, in our homes, and in our communities. So my friends, I said earlier that this region, our beautiful Caribbean region, is one of the most diverse in the world. We are home to a tapestry of languages, to countless ethnicities, traditions that are literally inspiring to all who come in contact with us. But despite this diversity, we do share that common history, that common destiny, and those common values of democracy. Our Charter of Civil Society in CARICOM reflects that. And the truth is, there have been examples in our history where countries individually may have fallen from it. But I am proud to belong to a community that seeks to build up and to bring people back into the middle when there is an aberration or when things fall outside of the ambit of the Charter of Civil Society. In times of crisis, our unity has been our greatest strength. Whether responding to hurricanes, as we saw as recent as last year, whether to responding to economic challenges as we have been doing in the last few years in this polycrisis moment, whether responding to pandemics as we did with COVID-19, we have always shown that we are always stronger together. This spirit of resilience must now guide us as we face the challenges of the 21st century. Events like CariFesta and the Caribbean Premier League in cricket are not just celebrations of culture and sport. They are genuine platforms of regional integration. So is our courts, the Caribbean Court of Justice, our universities. They remind us that we're not just isolated countries or islands or mainland communities, but we are a connected community. We continue to have opportunities to forge partnerships, new partnerships, and pathways for collaboration. Our shared heritage is not just a source of pride. It must now equally be a blueprint for our future. By embracing the diversity that defines us, we can build a region that is even more inclusive, more innovative, and that remains united. I hope that this conversation tonight will inspire action, collaboration, and a shared commitment to harnessing culture as a catalyst for the Caribbean's future. As chairman of CARICOM, I am conscious that we have a story to tell, and we actually have a willing audience across the world to listen to that story. How do people of different backgrounds, with different religions, how do people come together and stay together without the bloodshed and wars that are now causing so many across the world to suffer? This is a story that is relevant, valid, and authentic. Tonight, as we gather to reflect on the power of our shared heritage, I urge us to think deeply about its potential for the future. How do we, I repeat, how do we ensure that the richness of our culture becomes a force for transformation, first internally, but then for the benefit of humanity? A drive of empathy and caring, a drive of creativity, of discipline, of responsibility, of innovation, of economic empowerment and enfranchisement, of sustainable development. I want to tell you that I believe that the answer lies in recognizing that culture is not just something we inherit. It is something that we create and shape every day. There are aspects of what we inherit. In my own country, Mighty Gabby has the famous song, Culture. Carrying the Child by Granny, that is part of we culture. doing things. He actually has a line in it about passionate love making. That is part of our culture. But the point is that the aspects of our culture that make us laugh like that, when we hear David Rudder talk about Bacchanal Lady, and you hear the lyrics, you can almost see the person walking before you. When you hear Night Nurse from Gregory Isaacs, it remains an ever-present classic, even though he is no longer able to sing it for us. My friends, culture shapes who we are. It was going to enrich or undermine our economies. That choice is ours. We can determine if it will transform our societies. That choice is ours. We can determine equally how we use it to guide us through these challenging times. That choice is ours. Culture is living, and it is a breathing force that holds, I believe, the keys to unlocking a brighter future for this Caribbean community. I want us to explore together how we can harness the power of this culture as that key force in the post-independence era of the Caribbean, because that is what is going to define us, and that is what is going to allow us to conclude the race with strength and resilience. But it will only happen when all of us start to see people, hear people, and feel people. Because if we can live that day by day, then we can get the confidence to move together as a united people, recognizing that it is only when we are united that we win. Thank you.